The Weight of Silence. Part 1. The Inheritance of Wounds. He found me behind the cake table, smiling like he was delivering good news, and told me he couldn't stand looking at this ugly black pig his father had married. He said it soft, close to my ear, so the photographer 2 feet away kept right on snapping pictures of a happy bride. My name is Vesta. That afternoon, I had been Mrs. Vesta Renfro for exactly 2 hours. I want to tell you those words shook me because they were cruel. They did. But what shook me more was the rhythm of them, the way they landed too smooth, too rehearsed, like a line he'd said before, maybe even practiced. I didn't know it yet, but I'd hear that same shape of cruelty again years later from someone else's mouth. And I'd recognize it the way you recognize a song you didn't know you'd memorized. Roydell was 26 that day, my husband Eustace's only son, and he hadn't come to the wedding for me. He'd come to watch his father marry someone who wasn't his mother, and he'd decided before he ever shook my hand that I was the villain in whatever story he was telling himself. What he said next is the part one still turn over at night. He told me he already knew about the diagnosis, the spot they'd found on his father's lung 2 months before, caught early, doctors calling it treatable if Eustace did the treatment right. Roydell knew, and he'd come anyway to deliver his verdict on his father's choice of wife instead of asking his father how scared he was. Eustace caught the last of it. I watched him cross the reception floor faster than a man 3 weeks into chemo should have been able to move, his hand finding Roydell's shoulder, his voice low and pleading in a way I'd never heard from him. Not today. Please, son. Not today. Roydell looked at his father like he was looking at a stranger, said something about not staying in a house with her, and walked out through the open doors before the cake was even cut. Half the guests pretended not to notice. The other half noticed everything. Before I keep going, tell me what time it is where you're watching this from. Something tells me this is the kind of story you'll remember exactly when you started it. It wasn't until later, dancing the first dance with my new husband, that I understood the insult wasn't really about me at all. Roydell had been carrying that wound long before I walked into his father's life. Somebody had handed it to him, polished and ready, and he'd been waiting for a reason to use it. I just happened to be standing there when he needed one. I married a kind, steady man that day. I didn't fully understand yet that I was also marrying his unhealed places. The way he flinched when his son's name came up. The silence he kept about whatever happened between him and Roydell's mother. How he changed the subject every single time. Near the end of the night, Eustace pulled me close during the toasts, his lips against my temple, his breath unsteady. Vesta, he said, I need you to promise me something before I get too sick to ask you properly. I turned to look at him, waiting. The band picked that exact moment to strike up again, drowning him out, and the room erupted into clapping before I ever heard the rest of his sentence. Nearly 10 years would pass before Roydell spoke to his father again. Part 2. The second diagnosis. The second time a doctor said the word cancer to us, he didn't soften it. No spot, no shadow, he said. Tumors, plural. And looked straight at me instead of my husband, because by then he already knew who'd be carrying this. I had spent those years learning how to run a household quietly while my husband ran a business loudly. And now I had maybe a season to learn it the other way around. Eustace started walking me through the company books at the kitchen table at night. His handwriting shakier than it used to be, explaining accounts and vendors and a Texas property file he flipped past too fast for me to ask about. I told myself I was grateful he trusted me with any of it. Underneath that gratitude sat something colder, I didn't want to name yet. The creeping sense that a man only hands over his whole life like that when he already knows how the story ends. I didn't. A woman learns when her husband is handing her the keys, and when he's just showing her where the keys are kept for later. Word that Eustace was sick again didn't come from Roydell calling to ask. It came from Brooksville itself. From a church usher who'd heard it from a hospital clerk, who mentioned it to my hairdresser, who mentioned it to me like she assumed I already knew. That was the first crack I'd felt in nearly a decade of silence. Not Roydell reaching toward his father, but the town reaching toward Roydell before either of us did. 3 days later his name lit up Eustace's phone while we were eating dinner. Eustace let it go to voicemail, too tired to talk, and the message played out loud on speaker before either of us thought to turn it down. Roydell's voice came through flat, businesslike. asking about the company's current value before he asked a single question about his father's health. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said, "Mama said I should at least find out where things stand before it's too late to ask." Mama said. Nearly 10 years of silence, and still her voice was riding shotgun in every word that came out of his mouth. Eustace didn't react to the voicemail the way I expected. He just closed his eyes at the table, tired in a way that had nothing to do with chemo, and went to bed early without finishing his food. That night, half asleep beside him, I heard him say a name into the dark that wasn't mine and wasn't Roydell's. Loretta. Just that. Soft like an old habit his mouth hadn't unlearned. I lay still and didn't ask him about it in the morning. Some doors you don't knock on while a man is still healing from the last time they were opened. The next afternoon, looking for our insurance policy in the back of his file cabinet, my hand landed on a thin stack of envelopes tied together with a rubber band gone brittle with age. They were addressed to Eustace from a law office in Texas, every one of them still sealed, postmarked years before I'd ever met him. The strangest part wasn't that they were there. It was that someone had taken the trouble to keep them. They weren't shoved into a junk drawer or lost behind a cabinet. They'd been bundled together carefully, as if Eustace had recognized exactly who they were from and decided, years ago, that not opening them was easier than whatever waited inside. I sat there on the floor of that office a long time, turning them over in my hands, before I let myself wonder what kind of man keeps mail like that closed for that long, and what kind of woman finds out by accident. I called Roydell on a Tuesday evening for his father's sake and not my own, and he let it ring 4 times before he answered just long enough to say, "I don't have anything to say to you," and hang up before I could get a single word out. I sat there holding a dead phone to my ear longer than I needed to, the way you do when you're not ready to admit something is over. What I didn't know that evening was that someone in my own house had been doing quietly, patiently what I just failed to do loudly, and had been doing it for a year without telling me a word of it. I found out because Selah left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter, and a message came through from a name I hadn't seen in years. Selah sat at the end of the table the whole time, quiet in the particular way she'd learned to be quiet since the night she handed me her phone. When the 11th document came out, a folder Wendell set down separately from the others never opened, she finally spoke. "What's that one?" "That one stays closed," Eustace said. "Why?" He looked at her a long moment, the kind of look a father gives a daughter when he's deciding how much truth she can carry. "The Texas land stays exactly as it is, baby. Let it be his to find." Selah didn't push, but I watched something shift across her face. Not confusion exactly. More like she was filing the moment away somewhere to take out and examine later, the way I'd started doing myself with every strange, deliberate silence in that house. I felt the weight of it, too, sitting there watching my husband protect a piece of land by doing absolutely nothing to it, on purpose in front of witnesses. There's a kind of cruelty in patience when patience is the whole plan, and I wasn't sure yet if I admired it or feared it. Wendell gathered the signed papers into his bag once Eustace excused himself to rest, and I walked him out to his car the way I always did, more out of habit than necessity. He stopped at the door, hand still on the handle, and lowered his voice the way people do when they've decided to say something they probably shouldn't yet. "Vesta, can I tell you something about that folder he won't let me touch?" I told him to go ahead. He glanced back toward the house like he wanted to be sure of his own privacy before he finished the thought. "I remember enough to know there's a deed of trust attached to that land. I also remember there were provisions in it that made him unusually protective of the file. Something about a lien that could be transferred." Part 6, The Lie. I remember this one because I asked him directly, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, and he chose the lie instead of the truth. "Why won't you open that folder from Texas?" Eustace was peeling an orange in the way he always did, slow and methodical. The orange had been his habit since the treatment started. Something about the smell of it settling his stomach. "It's nothing to worry about, Vesta," he said. "Just some old business I never settled right. Let it be." I had spent enough years married to him to know when he was telling me something with the shape of truth but the weight of a lie. He didn't look up from the orange, and that was how I knew. "Eustace, I've been running this business for months now. I'm signing checks, talking to vendors, handling the things you used to handle. If there's something I need to know about." "There's nothing you need to know about that land. he said. Too fast. It has nothing to do with you. That was the lie. Not that there was nothing to know, there clearly was, but the part about it not having anything to do with me. Because I'd found the loan document. I'd seen the interest rates. And I'd read enough in the last few weeks to know that whatever was attached to that Texas property was attached by a thread long enough to reach all the way into our house. If it has nothing to do with me, I said carefully, then why is it in your will? He stopped peeling the orange. Just for a second. Then his hands resumed their work like nothing had happened. Estate planning is just covering all the bases, he said. You don't need to worry about any of that until I'm gone. And if I'd rather worry about it while you're still here to answer questions? He didn't answer that. He just finished peeling the orange, separated it into sections, and pushed half of them across the table toward me the way he always did, a peace offering disguised as a shared snack. I took the orange sections. I didn't eat them. I just held them in my palm like I was holding the shape of something he wasn't willing to say out loud. Part 7, the courthouse. Wendell got me the time and I took it. I told Eustace I was going to run errands, which was true enough if you counted researching my own husband's legal history as an errand. The county courthouse was 2 towns over, and I dressed carefully for the occasion. Nothing too obvious. Just a woman with a reasonable question at the records desk. Could you help me find some information about a property in Texas? The clerk, a woman named Sylvia who'd been working there for 32 years and had seen everything at least twice, gave me a look that said she knew what I was really doing without me having to say it. Honey, if you're looking for something you think your husband's been hiding, I can point you toward the right drawer. But I can't tell you what you'll find in it. I know, I said. That's the part one need help with. She led me to the microfilm room. A tiny space that smelled like old paper and dust. The kind of room where people came to find secrets they weren't sure they wanted to find. Property records aren't always in the same place, she said, pulling out a drawer. Depends on when the deed was filed. What year are we looking at? Late 80s. Maybe early 90s. She pulled out a different drawer and set a heavy book on the table. Start here. Let me know if you need help reading the handwriting. The handwriting was small and cramped, the kind of script you get when someone's trying to fit too many words on a page. But the names were clear enough. Eustace Renfro. Loretta Renfro. Joint owners. I stared at the page a long time. Joint owners. Not just Eustace. Not just Loretta. Both of them, on a deed dated 1987. So the property wasn't just his, I said to no one in particular. It was theirs. Together. Sylvia leaned over to look. Looks that way. But that's not the whole story. She reached over me and flipped forward a few pages, landing on something that made her click her tongue against her teeth. This is interesting. See here? A separate document filed about a year later. A loan document looks like. Using the property as collateral. Is that unusual? It's unusual that the loan was taken out in one name only. Eustace's. Not joint. I looked at the page. Everything after that felt like I was reading about someone else's life. The loan amount was significant. The interest rate was favorable. The terms were straightforward enough. But what caught my eye was a small note in the margin, written in a hand that didn't match the rest of the document. Loretta forfeited interest in exchange for full control of household accounts. I read it 3 times. She traded the land, I said slowly, for access to the money. Sylvia nodded. Looks like it. And she got what she wanted. These records show a series of accounts being opened around the same time. All in her name. So she gave up a piece of property she never really wanted. In exchange for something she actually cared about? That's what it looks like. But here's the strange part. She flipped forward again. These accounts? The ones she opened? They were emptied out within 2 years. Every penny. And then, she said, tapping the page, a set of documents related to the property itself. A lien. A lien. Filed by the bank. Against the property. The loan was never fully repaid. The math of it was starting to make a kind of ugly sense. Loretta had wanted money, not land. So she'd given up the land, taken the money, and spent it. And Eustace had been left holding something that was worth less than what it cost to keep it. A liability dressed up as an asset. I sat back in my chair, the old wood creaking beneath me. So she walked away clean, I said. And he's been carrying this thing for 30 years. Sylvia closed the book slowly, the way you close something heavy. Looks like it. But I'd say there's more to the story. There always is with these old wounds. She looked at me, her eyes kind in the way they are when someone knows they're telling you something you'd rather not hear. You know, in all my years I've seen a lot of women come in here looking for answers. Most of them are looking for proof of something they already suspect. You're not the first one. She paused. And you won't be the last. I thanked her and drove home in silence, the pages of my notebook filled with names and dates and numbers that I didn't fully understand yet. What I understood was that the Texas property wasn't just a piece of land. It was the artifact of a failed marriage, a financial weapon, and a wound that had never quite healed. And I was the woman who'd married into the middle of it without knowing. Part 8. Loretta's telephone. The phone call came on a Thursday, 3 days after I'd found the documents. Vesta? This is Loretta. I had heard her name 1,000 times, but never in her own voice. It was lower than I expected. Steadier. The voice of a woman who'd had a long time to practice exactly how she sounded when she wanted something. I'd like to see you, she said. Tomorrow afternoon. My place. It wasn't a request. It wasn't really an invitation. It was a summons, delivered in the tone of someone who was used to being obeyed. All right, I said. I'll come. She gave me an address, and I wrote it down even though I already knew where she lived. Everyone in Brooksville knew where Loretta lived. It was the kind of house you drove past and wondered about. The kind of house that seemed to be waiting for something. Selah was in the kitchen when I got off the phone, and she looked at me with that sharp look she'd developed over the last few months. The look of someone who'd learned to read rooms too young. Are you going to see her? She asked. Yes. She's going to be mean to you. I know. Are you going to let her? I thought about that for a moment. I think so. For a while. There's something she knows, and she's the only one who can tell me what it is. Selah nodded slowly like she was filing that away. Tell her I said hi, she said. She always called me on my birthday, even when Daddy didn't want her to. That stopped me. She called you. Every year. Just to say happy birthday. Nothing else. Selah shrugged. I never told Daddy. It seemed like it would make him sad. I stood there in my own kitchen, realizing that the woman I'd been told to fear had been quietly showing up for my daughter in the one way that mattered. A phone call once a year. Nothing more. But enough. Part 9. The visit. Loretta's house was smaller than I expected. Clean, neat, with flowers in the window boxes and a porch swing that looked like it had been used recently. She opened the door before I could knock. You're early, she said. Good. She stepped aside and I walked in the way you walk into a room full of quiet weapons. She was shorter than I'd imagined, but there was a steel in her posture that made her seem taller. Her hair was gray and pulled back. Her eyes were the same shade of brown as Roydell's, the same color as the land they'd both been fighting over for years. Sit down, she said, gesturing toward a chair. I don't bite. I sat. She sat across from me, the coffee table between us like a negotiation table. You came to see me because you want to know about the Texas land, she said. No preamble. No small talk. Just the truth laid out like a hand of cards. Yes. And you've been to the courthouse. Talked to Wendell. Found the documents. I didn't deny it. Good, she said. That saves us both time. She leaned forward, and for a moment I saw something in her face that I hadn't expected. Not cruelty. Not anger. Something closer to exhaustion. You want to know what happened? Why Roydell hates his father? Why the land is so important? Why I called your daughter every year? All of it. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Here's the truth, Vesta. And I'm telling you this because you deserve to know. Not because I owe you anything, but because I've been sitting on this for 30 years and I'm tired of carrying it. I didn't say anything. I just waited. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. The company was in his name. The accounts were in his name. The land we bought together was in his name. Everything. Her hands were still. Her voice was flat. I could have fought him. I should have. But Roydell was young and I didn't want to put him through a court battle he'd never understand. So I made a different deal. I gave up the land and took the cash. And then, she said, her voice dropping lower, I spent the money on something I never told him about. What was it? Roydell's future. His education, his housing, his start in life. Every penny I got from that settlement, I put toward making sure Roydell wouldn't need Eustace for anything. Wouldn't owe him anything. Wouldn't have to beg him for anything. She leaned back in her chair. Eustace never knew. He thought I'd wasted it. Made me out to be the villain to everyone who asked. And I let him because it was easier than telling the truth. Easier than admitting I'd let a man take everything from me, and then had to bargain to get anything back. He did take everything, I said quietly. He took the business, she said. He took the land. He took the marriage for what it was worth. But he didn't take my son. And that's what I wanted to protect. The room was quiet. I could hear the clock ticking from the hallway. The land, I said finally. You said you gave it up. But the lien is still there. The payments are still coming due. Eustace has been carrying it this whole time. I know, she said. That was his choice. He could have let it go. Could have let the bank take it. Could have settled with them years ago. But he held on to it because it was the one thing that connected us. The one thread he couldn't cut. He still loves you, I said, and I didn't know if I was saying it to her or to myself. She didn't deny it. She just looked at me with those eyes that had seen too much. Maybe, she said. Or maybe he just can't stand to lose anything else. There's a difference. She walked me to the door and stopped me with her hand on my shoulder. Take care of my son, she said. Roydell. You and I have no reason to love each other, but we both love him. And he's going to need someone who can see through all this mess. Someone who doesn't have a stake in the fighting. I nodded and walked down the steps. In the car, I sat for a long time with my hands on the steering wheel, not going anywhere. Everything I'd thought I knew about my marriage, about my husband's past, about the woman I'd been told to fear, it had all been rearranged in the space of one conversation. I wasn't the villain of the story. Loretta wasn't the villain. We were just two women who'd been placed in the same story and told we were enemies by a man who couldn't bring himself to tell the truth. Part 10: The Undoing. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It happened in pieces. Wendell called me 3 days after my visit to Loretta's house. Vesta, I need to tell you something about that land. Something I should have told you before. Tell me. The lien on that property, it's been transferred. 2 years ago. Eustace signed something he shouldn't have. A document that changes who holds the debt. Changed it to who? Roydell. I sat down heavily in the chair. Roydell. The paperwork was drawn up quietly. No notice. No warning. Eustace transferred the lien to Roydell without telling him. The debt is now technically attached to Roydell's name, not to the property itself. Why would he do that? To protect you, Wendell said. When he dies, you'll inherit the house, the business, the accounts. But you won't inherit the debt. It stays with Roydell. He's been carrying it for 2 years now, and probably doesn't even know it. No, I said. He knows. Or he's starting to. I thought about Roydell's voicemail, the one where he asked about the company's value before he asked about his father's health. I thought about his careful questions, the way he'd been circling this thing for months without knowing what he was circling. He's protecting us, I said. Eustace is protecting us. By giving him the debt. He's giving him more than that, Wendell said quietly. The property itself is still in Eustace's name. But the debt attached to it, the part that makes it a liability, that's Roydell's. He's making Roydell the inheritor, I said slowly. Not of value. Of burden. Wendell didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Part 11: The Letter. I found the letter 3 days later. It was tucked inside Eustace's nightstand drawer, under a stack of medical papers I'd been meaning to organize. The envelope was thick, unmarked, addressed to Roydell in Eustace's shaky handwriting. I opened it without thinking, the way you open something you've been wondering about for years. Inside was a single page, covered in Eustace's hand. Roydell, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I need you to understand why I did what I did. The land in Texas was never meant to be a burden. It was meant to be your legacy. Something to build on. Something that would always be yours no matter what happened between us. But I made mistakes. Your mother and I made mistakes. And the biggest one was letting the money get between us. The fights, the lawyers, the years of silence. I put you in the middle of something you should never have been in the middle of. That's on me. It's always been on me. The lien I gave you, the debt attached to that land, I gave it to you because I knew you wouldn't take anything else. You were too proud, too angry, too hurt to accept anything that looked like charity. So I gave you something that looked like a curse, hoping it would become a blessing. Hoping you'd fight through it, the way I should have fought through our brokenness. The way I never had the courage to. Forgive me for what I couldn't give you. Forgiveness, I hope, for what I'm leaving you. Your father. Eustace. I read it twice and then a third time. The shape of it, the careful, deliberate way he'd chosen his words. It reminded me of the wedding day insult from Roydell all those years ago. The same rhythm, the same rehearsed quality. But where Roydell's words had been weapons, Eustace's were a bridge. He'd practiced this letter. He'd been practicing it for years probably, without ever finding the courage to send it. And now in his own way, he was telling his son everything he'd never been able to say out loud. Part 12, The Crossing. I drove to Roydell's house myself. It was evening when I got there, the sun low and long across the fields. He came to the door barefoot, his hair sticking up like he'd been sleeping. What do you want? I didn't answer that. I just handed him the letter. He took it without reading it. What is this? A letter from your father. He wrote it before he got really sick. He never had the courage to give it to you, but I think you should read it. He stared at it in his hands, turning it over like he was deciding whether to open it. Please, I said. Just read it. He didn't open it right away. He looked at me with a complicated expression, part suspicion, part exhaustion, part something I couldn't name. Why are you doing this? He asked. You don't owe me anything. I've been nothing but cruel to you. Because I know what it's like to carry something for too long, I said. And I know what it costs. He looked at the letter for another long moment, and then he opened it. I watched him read it, his face shifting through a series of emotions I couldn't track. Anger, disbelief, something softer that he tried to hide. Did you know about this? He asked when he finished. Not until a few days ago. Did my mother know? I don't think so. I think he carried this alone. He closed his eyes, holding the letter against his chest. He was always like this, he said quietly. Always protecting us from things we didn't know we needed protecting from. Roydell. I know I've been terrible, he said. To you. To him. To everyone. I spent so long being angry about what I didn't have that I couldn't see what I did have. You can still fix it, I said. He's not gone yet. You can still fix it. He looked at me, his eyes wet in the fading light. Will you drive me there? He asked. Part 13, The Reconciliation. Eustace was asleep when we arrived, the room dark except for the small lamp on his bedside table. Roydell sat in the chair beside him, not touching him, just looking at his face like he was trying to memorize it. I stayed by the door watching. He sat there for a long time before he finally reached out and took his father's hand. Dad, he said softly. I'm here. Eustace's eyes opened slowly, and when they found his son, something shifted in his face. Something I hadn't seen before. Not the exhaustion I'd grown used to. Not the resignation. Something closer to peace. Son, he said. You came. I did, Dad. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry too, Eustace said. I should have told you. I know, Dad. I know. And I'm okay. We're both okay. Eustace's grip on his son's hand tightened. The land. I know about the land, Dad. And I know about the debt. And I'm not angry. I could never be angry. You were trying to protect me. I was trying to protect you from everything, Eustace said, his voice thin but determined. From your mother. From myself. From all the mistakes I made. And I just made it worse. I'm still here, Roydell said. And I'm okay. We're both going to be okay. I slipped out of the room then, leaving them in the quiet. In the kitchen I sat down at the table and let myself cry. Not for myself exactly. For all of them. For the years of silence and suffering and love that had finally, in the 11th hour, found its way to the surface. Part 14. The rest. Eustace lived another 6 weeks. They weren't the easiest weeks, but they were something better than easy. They were true. Roydell came every day. He sat with his father in the quiet, talking about nothing and everything. They played chess, though Eustace's hands were too weak to move the pieces, and Roydell moved them for him. They watched old movies together the way they'd done when Roydell was young. Loretta came once. She sat with Eustace for an hour while Roydell and I waited in the living room, not listening to what they said. When she came out, her eyes were red, but she was smiling. "It's done," she said. "Everything that needed to be said, we said." I nodded and she took my hand. "Thank you," she said, "for making all of this possible." "It was never my job to make it possible," I said. "I just stopped getting in the way." She squeezed my hand. "Sometimes that's the hardest thing of all." When Eustace finally passed, he went quietly, the way he'd lived, surrounded by people who loved him, at peace with everything he'd spent a lifetime trying to fix. The funeral was small. Reverend Banks spoke, and he used the scripture Eustace had chosen months before, when he was still well enough to pick out the details of his own leaving. Roydell stood beside me, holding his father's ashes in a simple wooden box. "He wanted to be buried on the land," he said quietly. "The Texas land. Then that's where we'll take him." We drove together, the three of us, Roydell, Selah, and me. The land in Texas was nothing special to look at. Just a piece of property that had caused more trouble than it was worth. But we stood on it together and let the wind carry what was left of a man who tried so hard to do the right thing and ended up doing the wrong thing more times than he'd ever wanted to admit. "I'm going to sell it," Roydell said. "The land. Pay off the debt. Make something new out of it. That sounds like the right thing to do." He looked at me, the wind in his hair. "You know, I spent so long thinking you were the enemy. And you were never the enemy at all. You were just the one who saw through all of us." "I didn't see through anyone," I said. "I just waited. And I hoped." We buried Eustace's ashes under a tree that was old enough to have seen a lot of years. And then we drove back to Brooksville, the three of us, not quite a family but something close. Part 15. The New Beginning. 3 months later, I got a letter from Roydell. "Vesta, I wanted to tell you I'm doing okay. The land is sold. The debt is settled. And I've started something new. A foundation in my father's name. Something to help families who are going through the same kind of stuff we went through. The fighting, the silence, the not knowing how to say the things that matter until it's almost too late. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why he did everything he did. But I know he was trying to protect us. Both of us. And I know you gave him that. The chance to be protected. The chance to be loved. The chance to let someone carry him for a while. Thank you for being there. For seeing through all of it. For waiting. I hope one day I can be as strong as you were. Roydell." I read the letter a few times and then put it in the box with all the other things I was keeping. Not to hold on to the past. Not to keep the wounds open. To remind myself that some stories take a long time to finish. And some of them never really end. They just find their way to the right place. That was the shape of it. The story of the land, the debts, the love, and the leaving. A story about a family that almost broke apart and came back together in the strangest way possible. A story about me. My name is Vesta and I'm still here. Still waiting. Still hoping. And somewhere in the quiet I can hear Eustace's voice, the way he sounded at the end, when he looked at his son and said the thing he'd been waiting a lifetime to say. "I'm sorry, son. Forgive me." And Roydell answered the way I'd always hoped he would. "There's nothing to forgive, Dad. That's what I'll take with me." That moment. That small, impossible moment of grace.